Jamal was a quiet, introverted kid. He didn't say much to anyone and kept mostly to himself. His classmates noticed how different he was. He wasn't like the others who laughed and joked in the hallways. Instead, Jamal always had his head down, walking through the halls like he was invisible. His dark skin and unique style often made him stand out in a crowd, but not in a way he wanted. Most days, he felt like the school didn't notice him unless it was to pick on him. There was a group of popular kids in his class who never seemed to let him be. Every day they made their jokes, laughing at his expense. They called him names, made fun of his clothes, and sometimes pushed him around. It was like their favorite game, but for Jamal, it wasn't a game at all. The laughter and the taunts cut deeper than anyone knew. Every time they made fun of him, it felt like the world was getting smaller. He hated the way they made him feel like an outsider, as if he didn't belong. The hallway was a battlefield for Jamal. He would rush past them, keeping his eyes focused on the ground, hoping to go unnoticed. He thought if he just kept quiet and didn't react, they would leave him alone. But every day, the teasing seemed to get worse. Jamal's heart raced as he walked past them, wishing he could disappear. They laughed and pointed at him, mocking the way he dressed or the way he spoke. They didn't know the first thing about him, but that didn't stop them from acting like they did. Some days, Jamal could hear the whispers of the other students. They didn't say much, but the stares made it clear they knew something was going on. They'd seen the way the bullies treated him, but no one stepped in to stop it. It was like everyone was too afraid to get involved, or maybe they just didn't care. Jamal tried to ignore the whispers, but they always followed him. At lunch, Jamal would sit alone, eating quietly, not wanting to draw attention to himself. He would look around at the other kids laughing and having fun, and he couldn't help but feel left out. Sometimes he wished he could be like them, confident and carefree, but it felt like something was always holding him back. He didn't know how to fight back. He didn't want to start trouble, but inside, he was tired. Tired of being pushed around, tired of feeling like he didn't matter. Despite everything, Jamal never said a word. He kept his thoughts to himself and his emotions hidden behind his silence. No one knew how badly the bullying affected him. No one could see the weight it carried on his shoulders. Jamal just kept moving forward, keeping to his routine. Each day felt like the same as the last, with the same old teasing and the same old stares. But deep down, Jamal was stronger than anyone realized. Even though he didn't show it, he was building something inside himself, something the bullies could never see. The bullying started to get worse, and Jamal couldn't ignore it anymore. Every day felt like he was walking into a storm. The bullies were relentless. They made fun of his hair, his clothes, even the way he talked. Sometimes they would sneak behind him and push him into the lockers, laughing as if it was all just a joke. Jamal tried to keep his head down, but it was hard when every corner he turned seemed to bring more taunts and laughter. At first, he thought it would pass, that they'd grow bored of picking on him. But they didn't. They took it further, getting more creative with their pranks. One day, they filled his locker with scraps of paper, making it impossible for him to get his books. Another time, they spread rumors about him, telling others he was strange and different, just to make sure everyone stayed away from him. It felt like there was no escape. Jamal didn't know how to fight back. He wasn't the kind of person to lash out or make a scene. He had always been quiet and kept his feelings to himself. But the more the bullies picked on him, the more it started to hurt. It wasn't just the insults anymore. It was the feeling of being powerless, of being alone. Jamal wished he could be like the other kids who weren't afraid to stand up for themselves. But every time he tried, his voice caught in his throat, and the words wouldn't come out. He had his friends, but they were too scared to stand up to the bullies. They didn't want to become targets too, so they kept their distance. Jamal understood, but that didn't make it any easier. The days grew longer, and the laughter of the bullies echoed in his ears even when he was alone. He started to feel like he didn't belong at school. He wasn't one of the popular kids, and he wasn't one of the kids who could blend in unnoticed. It felt like he was trapped in a place where no one cared. Jamal didn't tell his parents. He didn't want them to worry, and he didn't want them to think he was weak. He tried to handle it on his own, like he always did. But it was getting harder. Each day, the anxiety built up inside him, weighing on his chest like a heavy stone. He found it hard to concentrate in class, his mind always wandering back to the next insult or the next shove. He started to dread school, the thought of facing another day of ridicule and loneliness. It wasn't just the bullies anymore. It was the feeling that no one understood, that no one cared enough to step in. The loneliness was worse than any insult. Jamal began to feel like he was invisible in the worst way possible. But even as the bullying grew more intense, Jamal didn't react. He stayed silent, not wanting to make things worse. He thought that if he just endured it, it would eventually stop. But deep down, he didn't believe that. Every day felt like a battle he couldn't win, and Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that something inside him was slowly breaking. As the weeks passed, a strange rumor began to spread around the school, something Jamal never expected. It wasn't about him directly, but it was about his family. Whispers started to circulate that Jamal wasn't just any ordinary kid, that his family was different. People began saying that his father was somehow involved in powerful government work, that Jamal's background was not what anyone assumed it to be. Some even said that his family had a secret, something no one knew, but everyone feared. At first, Jamal didn't think much of it. He continued to keep to himself, focusing on his studies and avoiding the bullies as best as he could. He didn't care about rumors. They were always just stories people told to entertain themselves. But the more the whispers spread, the more the air around him changed. Jamal started to notice the way other students looked at him. There was this uncertainty in their eyes, like they didn't quite know what to make of him. It was subtle, but it was there. The bullies, once so loud and confident in their teasing, started to act a little differently around Jamal. They'd still make their usual jokes and comments, but there was a shift in the way they did it. They seemed more hesitant, almost like they were testing the waters, unsure of how far they could push him. Jamal didn't understand it. What had changed? He hadn't said anything different, hadn't done anything out of the ordinary. But now, it seemed like they were watching him more carefully, as if they were trying to figure out if the rumors were true. It wasn't just the bullies who were reacting this way. Even some of the other kids who weren't part of the popular crowd started to give Jamal a curious glance. The rumor about his family's secretive nature had sparked a sort of fascination. People started to wonder if there was more to Jamal than just being the quiet kid who sat in the back of class. What if his family was hiding something? What if he was more powerful than anyone realized? The change in atmosphere was unsettling for Jamal. He wasn't used to this kind of attention. He had always preferred to stay out of the spotlight, to not stand out in any way. But now he felt like he was being watched, like everyone was waiting for him to reveal something. He didn't know how to respond to it. He didn't know how to make the rumors stop. All he wanted was to get through the day without being noticed, without drawing any attention to himself. One day, during lunch, a few of the bullies approached him. This time, they weren't mocking him or pushing him around. They were standing in front of him, their faces serious but with a hint of uncertainty. They asked him about the rumors, almost cautiously, like they were testing him. They wanted to know if they were true, if his family really was as powerful as everyone said. Jamal didn't know what to say. He just stared at them, unsure of how to respond. The truth was, he didn't know much about his family's secrets. He wasn't even sure if the rumors were real. But the bullies didn't give up. They kept pressing him for answers, demanding to know more. Jamal felt trapped. He didn't want to speak, didn't want to get involved in whatever strange game they were playing. But the pressure was too much. Finally, he just shook his head and walked away, hoping they would leave him alone. Little did Jamal know, this moment would be the turning point. The curiosity sparked by the rumors about his family was only going to grow, and the bullies, who had once seen him as weak and easy to target, would soon learn that Jamal was not as ordinary as they thought. The truth, when it came, would shake them to their core. The next few days at school felt strange for Jamal. He noticed that the usual bullies weren't as aggressive as they used to be. They didn't push him into lockers or make the same cruel jokes during lunch. Instead, they would stare at him from a distance, sometimes whispering to each other as if trying to figure out something. Jamal couldn't understand what was happening. Was it because of the rumors? Was there something about him that had changed in their eyes? One afternoon, as Jamal was walking down the hallway, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned and saw the leader of the bullies, Alex, standing there with a few of his friends. Alex had always been the loudest one, the one who would tease Jamal the most. But today, his demeanor was different. There was no mocking smile, no rude comments. Instead, Alex looked at Jamal, almost cautiously, as if he wasn't sure what to say. "Hey, Jamal," Alex started, his voice hesitant. We need to talk." Jamal was taken aback. He hadn't expected this. Alex had never spoken to him this way before. Usually, he would mock Jamal, calling him names and making everyone laugh. But now, Alex seemed almost nervous. Jamal didn't know what to say. His first instinct was to turn away and keep walking, but something in Alex's tone made him stop. "What do you want?" Jamal asked quietly, trying to sound calm, though his heart was racing. Alex shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his friends who were standing silently behind him. "Look, we've been hearing things about you, about your family," he said, his voice low. "We just wanted to know if it's true." Jamal's stomach sank. He had been hoping the rumors would fade, but now it seemed like they were only growing. He didn't want to talk about his family. It wasn't something he shared with anyone at school. His family was different, and he knew that well. But what could he say? He didn't want to lie, but he also didn't want to give them any answers. "I don't know what you're talking about," Jamal said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Just leave me alone." But Alex wasn't backing down. He stepped closer, his eyes scanning Jamal's face as if searching for some sign, some truth in his words. "I'm just asking, man," Alex pressed. "We heard your dad's some kind of big shot, right? Like a government guy. And you've got all this crazy stuff going on. Is it true? You don't have to be scared to tell us." The way Alex said the last part made Jamal freeze. There was something in his words that felt wrong. Like Alex wasn't asking out of curiosity, but out of fear. Jamal felt a wave of anger rise within him, but he controlled it. He wasn't about to let them push him into saying something he didn't want to say. He didn't want them to know anything about his family. He didn't want to become some kind of mystery or danger in their eyes. "I don't want to talk about it," Jamal replied firmly, his voice sharper this time. He looked around at the other students who were passing by, seeing if anyone noticed what was happening. Everyone seemed too busy to care, and Jamal felt even more isolated. For a moment, the group of bullies stood in silence, exchanging glances. Jamal could see the uncertainty in their eyes. They were starting to realize something. The power they thought they had over him wasn't as strong as they believed. It was clear now that Jamal wasn't the weak target they had once seen him as. "All right," Alex said finally, breaking the silence. "We're done here." With that, the group turned and walked away, but the tension remained in the air. Jamal stood there, unsure of what had just happened. Had they backed off because they were scared, or was there something else going on? Jamal couldn't tell, but one thing was for sure. Things had changed. The bullying wasn't the same anymore. The power dynamic had shifted, and Jamal couldn't help but wonder what was coming next. The days after the confrontation with the bullies felt oddly different for Jamal. The once constant laughter and teasing had all but disappeared. Now, when he walked down the hallways, he noticed the students looking at him, not in the mocking way they used to, but with something closer to respect, or maybe even fear. The rumors about his family seemed to have changed the way people saw him. Jamal didn't know how to feel about it. Was this what he wanted? He hadn't asked for this attention, yet it was now impossible to ignore. One afternoon, Jamal overheard a conversation between two of his classmates, Sarah and Tom. They were talking quietly in the corner of the library, but Jamal caught enough of their words to understand what was going on. They were discussing the rumors, the same rumors about his family. Sarah was asking Tom if it was true that Jamal's father had some kind of high-level position in the government, something secretive. Tom, who usually knew everything that went on in the school, seemed uncertain. "I don't know," he said in a hushed tone. "But if it's true, then Jamal might not be someone to mess with. His family's supposed to have serious connections." Jamal's stomach churned as he listened. He didn't like hearing people talk about him behind his back, but this was different. The rumors had taken on a life of their own, growing bigger and more mysterious with every passing day. The more he heard, the more he realized that the other students were starting to believe them. They were afraid of what they didn't understand, and they were treating him like someone with untold power. But in truth, Jamal had no idea what the rumors were even about. He knew his family was different. His father worked in a field that required a lot of secrecy, but he had never imagined that the truth would be twisted into something this big. Despite the change in how people treated him, Jamal still wanted nothing more than to fade into the background. He didn't want to be seen as anything special or mysterious. He didn't want anyone to know about his family's secrets. They were his family's business, not something for the school to gossip about. Jamal had always prided himself on being independent and quiet, but now it felt like the world was pushing him to be something else. He couldn't escape the looks, the whispers, or the way people were beginning to treat him like an outsider, even though he had always felt like one. The bullies, once his biggest tormentors, had started to keep their distance, but Jamal noticed that they were still watching him. Alex, the leader of the group, had been avoiding Jamal in the halls. Whenever they crossed paths, Alex's eyes would quickly shift away, as though he couldn't make eye contact. It was as if the power had shifted, and Alex now saw Jamal in a completely different light. Jamal couldn't figure out what had changed. One moment, he was the target of their jokes, and the next, he was someone to be feared. Then one day during lunch, Jamal was walking through the cafeteria when he saw Alex and his group sitting at their usual table. They were all looking at him, but this time, there was no laughter, no mocking gestures, just silence. Jamal felt his heart race. He had been avoiding them for weeks, unsure of what would happen if they ever confronted him again. He didn't know how to handle the new dynamic. As Jamal walked past them, he saw Alex stand up from the table, his posture a little stiff, like he was unsure of what to do. "Jamal," Alex called out, his voice less confident than usual. Jamal stopped in his tracks, unsure of how to respond. He had no idea what Alex wanted now, but he wasn't about to make things worse. "Yeah?" Jamal replied, his voice steady but wary. Alex hesitated, looking around at his friends who were all waiting for him to speak. After a long pause, Alex finally spoke, though his words were carefully chosen. We just wanted to say we're not messing with you anymore. The whole thing, it's over. We're done." Jamal stood there, surprised by the sudden shift. This wasn't how things usually went. Bullies didn't back down just like that. But there was something different in the air now. Alex and his group weren't trying to make fun of him or push him around. Instead, they seemed almost respectful. Jamal wasn't sure what to make of it, but he wasn't about to question it. "Okay," Jamal said slowly, still unsure of what was happening. "I didn't ask for any of this." He gestured toward the cafeteria. "I just want to be left alone." Alex nodded, looking slightly guilty. "We get it. We won't bother you again." The days that followed felt different for Jamal. The bullying had stopped, and the tension that once filled the air at school had shifted to something else, something Jamal couldn't quite figure out. His classmates still whispered behind his back, but now, instead of mocking him, they seemed to talk about him with awe, even fear. It was unsettling. Jamal never asked for this attention, but it was impossible to ignore. Everywhere he went, people stared. At lunch, in the halls, even in class, there was always someone watching him. Jamal could sense the change. He wasn't the quiet, invisible kid anymore. Now people seemed to treat him differently, like he was someone important. Some students would greet him in the hallway with a nervous smile or a nod, as if they were unsure how to act around him. He found it all confusing. The same students who used to avoid him or tease him were now bending over backward to be nice, even offering to help him with his work. Jamal wasn't sure how to respond to this sudden shift. It felt like everyone was walking on eggshells, as if they were afraid to make the wrong move around him. One afternoon, Jamal was sitting in the library, trying to focus on his homework. As usual, it was a quiet place, but today, the silence felt heavier. He looked up to see two of the popular girls, Tina and Leela, standing by the entrance, looking at him with hesitant expressions. They didn't approach him immediately. Instead, they just stood there, glancing at each other before finally walking over. "Hey, Jamal," Tina said, her voice soft. Jamal looked up from his book, surprised that they had come over. He hadn't spoken to either of them much before, other than the occasional greeting in the hallway. But now, they were acting like they wanted to talk. "Hi," Jamal replied, feeling a bit awkward. He had no idea why they were suddenly interested in him. "We just wanted to say," Leela began, but she hesitated. Tina nudged her, and Leela finally continued. "We've been hearing all this stuff about your family, and we just wanted to apologize. We didn't realize, that we were making things worse for you." Jamal's brow furrowed. What were they talking about? He hadn't spoken to them about his family. He didn't even know how much they really knew. The rumors had spread, but Jamal wasn't sure how much of it was true. "You don't have to apologize," Jamal said, trying to brush it off. He didn't want to make a big deal out of it. "It's not like it matters anyway." Tina and Leela exchanged a quick look, clearly unsure of what to say next. The atmosphere was tense, and Jamal could tell they were uncomfortable. "Well," Tina started again, "we just wanted to make sure you knew we're not like the others. We don't see you the way they do." Jamal was silent for a moment. He didn't know how to respond. The truth was, he didn't really know what to think of the way everyone was treating him. He wasn't sure if they were genuinely trying to be nice, or if they were just scared of what they thought might happen if they didn't. "Thanks," he said finally, though the words felt awkward coming out of his mouth. He didn't know if he believed them, but he didn't want to dwell on it. "I guess I just want things to go back to normal." "Of course," Leela said, giving him a small smile. "We won't bother you again." With that, the two girls walked away, leaving Jamal sitting alone at the table. As he watched them leave, he couldn't help but wonder if this was just the beginning. The bullies had backed off, yes, but now everyone was acting strange around him. He didn't want to be treated differently. He didn't want the attention. He just wanted to be like everyone else, to go through the day without feeling like people were constantly watching him. But no matter how hard he tried to ignore it, Jamal couldn't escape the feeling that the rumors had changed everything. People weren't afraid of him, at least not in the way the bullies had been. They were afraid of what they thought he might be. And for the first time, Jamal realized that the real challenge wasn't the bullies or the whispers. It was learning how to live with the weight of people's expectations, even if they weren't true. As the days passed, Jamal found himself stuck in a strange in-between world. The bullying had stopped, but in its place, a new kind of attention had begun. Students who once ignored him or even made fun of him were now treating him with caution, like he was someone they had to be careful around. Jamal didn't know if this change was better or worse. On one hand, he no longer had to deal with the harsh words and pushes in the hallways. On the other hand, it felt just as isolating to be treated like a mystery. During lunch one day, Jamal sat at his usual table, watching the other students laugh and talk amongst themselves. He felt distant from it all. It wasn't that he didn't want to join in, but the dynamic had shifted. He wasn't sure if he belonged there anymore. His mind wandered back to the conversations he had overheard, the whispers about his family and their mysterious background. Was it all just rumors, or was there some truth to what people were saying? The thought of his father's secretive work made Jamal uneasy. He never asked many questions at home. His father was always busy, and his mother, though warm and caring, never spoke much about their family's past. Jamal had always felt like there was something more, but it wasn't a subject anyone talked about openly. Now it seemed like everyone at school had their own version of the truth, and no one was too sure what the real story was. He was snapped out of his thoughts when he noticed Alex, the leader of the bullies, walk into the cafeteria. Alex glanced in Jamal's direction, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. There was no laughter, no mocking grin on Alex's face, just a brief, unreadable look. Jamal's heart raced. He didn't know what to make of this silent encounter. A few weeks ago, Alex wouldn't have looked at him twice without making a rude comment. Now, he was acting as if Jamal didn't exist, or maybe he was just too afraid to mess with him anymore. Jamal quickly turned his gaze back to his food, not wanting to dwell on it. He had no idea what Alex was thinking, and at this point, he didn't care, but it still bothered him. Jamal had always been the kind of person who kept his thoughts to himself, never looking for conflict. But now, it seemed like conflict had found him. The whole school was looking at him differently, and he wasn't sure how to handle it. A few minutes later, Sarah, a girl from his class, came over to his table. She had always been friendly but distant, and Jamal hadn't spoken to her much outside of class. "Hey," she said, sitting down across from him. "How's it going?" Jamal wasn't sure how to respond. "Good," he said quietly, not wanting to get into a long conversation. But Sarah didn't take the hint. "I know things have been weird," she continued, "with all the rumors going around and everything. But I just wanted to say, you don't have to worry about what everyone's saying. We all know you're not like what they're making you out to be." Jamal stared at her, not sure what to say. It was strange. Sarah was always kind, but this felt different. It was like she was trying to reassure him, like she felt guilty for something. "I didn't ask for any of this," he finally said. "I just want things to go back to normal." Sarah nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I know," she said softly, "but sometimes things don't go back to how they were. People change, and the way they see you changes too. Just try to hang in there." Jamal felt a mix of frustration and confusion. He didn't know what was worse, the bullying or this strange, careful treatment he was getting now. Everyone was walking around on eggshells, acting like he was someone to be feared, and it was starting to make him feel more isolated than ever. When lunch ended, Jamal gathered his things and left the cafeteria. He walked through the hallways with his head down, trying to avoid making eye contact with anyone. He just wanted the day to be over, to go home where things were simpler. But even at home, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had changed forever. The rumors, the strange looks from his classmates, the shift in the way people treated him, it was all too much to handle. As he lay in bed that night, Jamal tried to clear his mind. He thought about everything that had happened. The bullying, the rumors, the way the entire school had changed its perception of him. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that no matter what he wanted, things weren't going to go back to how they were. The world around him had already changed. Now, Jamal had to decide how he was going to handle this new reality. Would he continue to let the rumors define him, or would he find a way to take control of the story? The next few days seemed to blur together for Jamal. The strange tension around him persisted, but he tried to focus on getting through the days without making things more complicated. The other students continued to treat him differently, but Jamal had started to learn how to navigate through it. The whispers were quieter now, and the looks of fear were fading, but the weight of it all still hung in the air. It wasn't that he enjoyed the attention, but it felt like it was now a permanent part of his life. Despite everything, Jamal couldn't help but notice how much the shift in the school's dynamics had affected the way he viewed himself. At first, he had been overwhelmed by the fear and confusion that came with the rumors about his family. But now, something was changing inside him. He wasn't sure what it was exactly, but he felt a quiet strength building within him. He had never been the kind of person to draw attention to himself or to fight back against the world. He was always the quiet one, the observer. But now, with everything that had happened, he felt a strange sense of empowerment. It wasn't the power that came from the rumors about his family. Jamal knew that wasn't something he could control. It was something more subtle, a realization that he didn't need to let the way others viewed him define who he was. The bullies, the whispers, the nervous smiles from his classmates. It didn't matter anymore. Jamal was starting to see that he was more than just the rumors or the quiet kid in the back of the class. One afternoon, as Jamal was leaving class, he ran into Alex again. This time, it wasn't a casual glance or an awkward silence. Alex stepped in front of him, blocking his path. Jamal's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't feel the same fear he once would have. Alex had always been the one to taunt him, to make him feel small, but now there was something different in the air. Alex looked at him, his eyes uncertain, almost as if he was testing the waters. "Jamal," Alex said, his voice quieter than before. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For everything." Jamal didn't know how to respond. He was caught off guard by the apology, but at the same time, he realized it was something he'd never expected to hear. Alex had always been the one leading the group of bullies, never showing any sign of regret. But now, there was a hint of humility in his voice that Jamal couldn't ignore. "I don't need your apology," Jamal said, his voice calm but firm. "You don't get to make things right just by saying sorry." Alex looked down, nodding. "I get it," he said quietly. "I didn't know what I was doing. But I do now. And I respect you. You're not the person we thought you were." Jamal stood there for a moment, staring at Alex. The old Jamal might have felt nervous, unsure of what to do, but now he just felt a sense of relief. He had endured so much, and finally, the truth was being acknowledged. Not just by Alex, but by everyone around him. The apology didn't erase the past, but it was a start. "Thanks," Jamal said after a pause, then stepped around Alex, continuing on his way down the hallway. He didn't need to say more. This moment had marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. He didn't need to carry the weight of the past anymore. That night, as Jamal sat at his desk, doing his homework in the quiet of his room, he thought about everything that had happened. The bullying, the rumors, the way people had looked at him. He realized that for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like the outsider anymore. The shift in how people saw him had shown him something important. He had the power to shape his own story. He wasn't defined by the opinions of others or by the past. The next day, when Jamal walked into school, he did so with his head held high. He wasn't arrogant or boastful, but he felt a quiet confidence that he had never known before. The rumors and the bullying were behind him, and he had learned to let go of the fear that had once controlled him. The school still looked at him differently, but now it didn't matter. Jamal had finally found his place, not as the quiet kid in the back of the room, but as someone who could stand on his own, with or without anyone's approval. And as he walked through the halls, past the same faces that had once taunted him, Jamal realized that the most important thing he had gained through all of this was the understanding that he was enough, just as he was.